Welcome, everybody. Thank you again for joining us today. I cannot wait to introduce our guest to you. But before I do that, I want to thank some people that we always thank. We want to thank brassandwinds.com. Brass and Winds is a Quinn the Eskimo company, the best place to buy brass and wind instruments in the entire country. We can't recommend them highly enough. If you're looking for a new trumpet, check them out. Brassandwinds.com. We are Truer MU. We're the quickest way to learn the piano. We have self-guided courses on jazz for the complete beginner, a free piano course if you're looking. And if you want to study with a person, come to our Willow Music. That's willowschoolga.com, where you can learn from a person, either virtually or in person at our Willow location. We think we're a better way to learn music. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce our guest to you. This man has produced 23 gold and platinum albums by acts including Cheap Trick, Motley Crue, and Blue Oyster Cult. As an A&R man with Epic Records, he signed bands like REO Speedwagon, Boston, and Ted Nugent to his label, among others. Tom Werman, I am so pleased to have you on our show. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. When you mentioned Ted Nugent, I want to throw in there that we did not discuss politics.
Yes,
Okay?
that's
Yeah,
good to know.
please.
This is
Yeah.
early in his time before he became a political firebrand.
Yeah. Well, that's one way of putting it. That's a nice way of putting it. Yeah. Ted and I differ considerably in political philosophy. But we had a great time, and he has a lot of integrity, especially compared to many of the other artists I've worked with. I don't agree with his political perspective, but he's an honest person, and it's sometimes it's difficult for me to justify the fact that you know, I I was with him for so long. Anyway, enough of that.
No, not at all.
No.
I had never really listened to Ted Nugent before I started researching for this interview, and I actually really liked his voice. He was a very good. He is a very good musician.
Well, the voice you heard was probably not Ted's, depending on the song.
Okay, Cat
Um,
Scratch Fever.
Cat Scratch Fever was Ted, but Hey Baby and Stranglehold, those were Derek St. Holmes,
Oh,
who,
okay.
who was the second guitarist.
Oh, okay. That's
Mm.
interesting.
Yeah, he did most of the vocals. Ted started doing more vocals around the third album, around Cat Scratch Fever. Uh, Actually, on Free for All, Meatloaf did a lot of vocals. People don't know that.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
talked about Meatloaf coming down, but that wasn't credited, right? That's sort of.
Oh yeah, it's on there.
It's credited.
It
Okay,
is if you have the album jacket, which was
which
we,
nobody
we
does
had
anymore.
we loved album jackets back then.
Well, I want to talk about you actually. You played in bands starting in high school and college, and you even jammed with Jimi Hendrix twice. Want to talk about how that
One
happened? Just
once.
once
Where did you see twice?
on your blog. You
I
blogged about it,
wish. I wish.
so just once.
Um,
It's 65.
well, the deal is, in 1965, I was a junior at Columbia in New York, and my band had a really good gig at one of three discos that existed in New York at the time. And there were kind of a little set of beautiful people who would come in and, um, you know, trendsetters. And it was on Park Avenue and 59th in Delmonico's hotel. And our friends who were a little rougher around the edges than we were. We were a pretty pop cover band, um, not a pretty pop cover band, but a pretty pop cover band. Uh, and they were playing down 3 blocks down under the 59th Street Bridge at a place called Ondine. And Ondine was a hang for mainly British roadies. Um, but they ended at 1. We ended at midnight. So occasionally we would walk the 3 blocks down and hear their last set. And this one time, I don't know how it came about, but I sat in for their rhythm guitarists. They were called the Druids of Stonehenge. this band. And anyway, I sat in for their rhythm guitar player, and this house guy, Jimmy, he was kind of a fixture at the place, and he played guitar, and he played guitar behind his back, and he played guitar with his teeth, and I sat in, and of course I did rhythm guitar, blues, and A, gadank, 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 very easy, and he just, he was Jimmy. Years later, I met him coming. This is why you may have thought it was twice. I met him coming out of Manny's Music um, on 48th Street. And I reintroduced myself, and I said, gee whiz, look what's happened to you. Because he had gone to England meanwhile.
Right.
And he came back, and we talked for a minute, and he complained that people were paying too much attention to his guitar playing and not enough attention to his lyrics, because he kind of thought he was a poet who played guitar, not the other way around.
Wow.
So I couldn't really comment on that and say, gee whiz, Jimmy, I mean, your lyrics are interesting, but come on. you know. So that was that, and then he died. It was terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did
So,
you have designs? Did you want to be a professional musician when you were in the thick of it? Were you hoping to do that and then just change your mind? Or did you really
no,
think this is going to pass? I'm going to be something else.
I was a trained SEAL. I grew up in prep school in Boston, went to Ivy League college, went to Ivy League grad school, supposed to be a CEO. And I was, I just couldn't make that break. I wasn't a rebel. I did it later after a year with that in an advertising agency, which I just despised. And
yeah, I want to talk about that too.
yeah,
You tell a
well,
wonderful story about when you realized it was time to leave that gray advertising that
yeah,
you tried for
yeah,
a year. There's a paint story, and I want you to tell the paint story.
yeah. Well, first of all, I want to precede that with we a little story about a private party that the band played, the college band. We played a private party, and at that party was an attorney named Nat Weiss, and he came over to us at a break, and he said, "You guys are good. I am Brian Epstein's attorney in New York, and I think Brian would love to hear you." Now here's a guy offering us to audition for the Beatles manager in 1965, and that was Vietnam time. And so I said, well, look, let's just suppose that he liked us, and we made a record and we had a hit. We'd have to tour, right? And he said, that's what they usually do. And I said, sorry, bud, no can do. We'd lose our student deferment, and, we'd be sent over to Vietnam. And so I turned down an audition with the Beatles manager. And that's basically why my career path did not stay in the music lane. And also, I I think I would have been so flipped out by a career in, performing that I would probably have OD'd and
Yeah.
died. You know? I was never happier than when I was on stage playing. We did Beatles, Birds, and Stones almost exclusively, and my lead guitarist was brilliant. And he was in Dylan's road band. He was Dylan's musical director after college. And he lives in Denmark now. His name is Billy. His stage name is Billy Cross. And he's very well known in Denmark. Anyway, that's the deal. The paint story. I very obediently, went into business. At Gray Advertising, I accepted their offer, and I had an interior office with no windows. And I suppose I should have asked permission, but I wasn't happy. And I came in one weekend and painted the walls, very, very light pastel color, two opposing walls, blue to yellow. And it was a cheeky thing to do. It was kind of silly. I'm not sure why I did it, but I did not like the agency, and it wasn't because they were bad. It was that it was not the right fit. So the group head, that was on a Saturday. On Monday, I came in, and after I came in, the group head came in, and he had a big office in the corner with a lot of windows. And he walked by, and then he did a double take, and he came back and he looked in the office, and he said, and meanwhile, all the other offices were white
Right.
because that was the corporate way. And he said, very nice, nodded his head, and then went on to his office. That's the last I heard of it. The following Monday, I came into work and the office was white. Nothing was out of place. It was like the Twilight Zone. And and I said, "Oh boy, I have to get out of here now. I have to, and this is my excuse."
Right.
So I wrote a letter to Clive Davis, and I started interviewing at CBS, and fortunately, he hired me. And that was
Yeah.
lucky break, lucky break.
You were recommended to Epic Records. Is that
Yeah.
correct? Yeah.
Well,
And
there wasn't anything open at Columbia, but he said the director of A&R, A&R was so unimportant then that the head of it wasn't even a vice president. He was a director. And those categories mean a lot at corporations. So he said, the director of A&R needs an assistant. And I think they sent me out with an A&R man to see a band live and to report on them. Because that's, A&R men were talent scouts. And I wrote an enormous report, right down to the, I mean, right down to the drummer's shoes. I reported on everything. It was like a book. And they said, okay, this guy knows his stuff. An MBA and a love for rock and roll was perfect then.
And to clarify for the audience that doesn't know, A&R is artist representation, where you sign bands and take care of them for the label. Isn't that correct?
It's actually artist and repertoire.
Thank you.
A&R. And it originated, in the early days, in the 40s. You were assigned an artist on the label, and your job was to find material for the artist to sing.
Huh.
And so you met with a lot of publishers. And when I started at Epic, we actually had pianos in our offices, upright pianos. It was fantastic. And then in the 60s, with the advent of the singer-songwriter, then A&R men didn't have to do that anymore because people were writing their own material. And so the A&R man became pretty exclusively a talent scout and then a supervisor when you went into the studio. When you're the artist you signed, you had to make sure that whatever he was recording was successful.
Yeah. Now you were also in charge of responding to people who sent you material, and you were the rare A&R person who did respond. A lot of times people still, anytime you want to get through a gatekeeper, you send them your book or you send them your tape or whatever.
Yeah.
And you actually responded with feedback. And what did you do that for?
I don't know why. I don't know. I spent a huge amount of time. I just didn't think it was, these people were putting their heart and soul into it. It was the most important thing in their lives. And they sent it in, and it's just not fair to receive a form letter back saying, this doesn't seem to be a good fit with us right now. Thank you for saying, something like that. I thought maybe I could give them a little, productive feedback, something that might help them. I actually remember I got, in my time at Epic, I probably got 4 or 5 tapes, cassettes from jail. And I was very, very nice to them.
Right.
I wrote long letters, and I was encouraging. I did not encourage the people who were really bad.
Yeah.
I never. I mean, I would come in on the weekends sometimes because I had cartons of cassettes, and I never passed on a band that became big. Um, I did find bands and offer them to the label, uh, and and uh, and my boss passed on them,
Yes.
and they became huge.
Bands
With,
like Kiss,
yes,
Rush, Skinnerd, and
yeah,
Whitney Houston, among
and
others.
Whitney, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Whitney was later, yeah.
right. Were there any bands? So, and I'm going to talk about your success rate too. You signed REO,
Yeah,
Speedwagon, Nugent, Cheap Trick, and Boston. Was it
and
common for and
Molly.
more? Oh, Molly Hatchet. There's other bands. We're going to get to them too.
Okay,
Trying to keep the list small.
sorry.
Obviously, your record is in stone here. But was there anyone you passed on that turned out to be awesome that you wish you had recommended?
Actually, no. Um, there was one that turned out to be, um, uh, very successful and unique, and that I passed on because I didn't think we, as a label, could really know what to do with them. So I recommended them to Columbia's A&R department, and no one signed them either, and that was Manhattan Transfer.
Gosh.
Yeah, and I really like them. I saw them a lot, and but they were just not. They required a special kind of treatment, and I think Atlantic was a really good place for them. So so that one I let go, but it was okay.
Yeah. You signed bands like Molly Hatchet that other people passed on. These are bands that you're the only one who saw anything in Molly Hatchet. What do you think you heard in bands like this that you were the only one who signed them on?
Well, it's nothing specific. I just liked the music. I mean, if I found that if I really liked something, a lot of other people did too. It was really, I know it sounds, it's simple. Um, they came and played for me live in the studio when I was mixing a song in Atlanta. They came up from Jacksonville, Florida, with their manager and did a set right in the studio. We took a break, and I signed them on the spot. They were that good. They were really that good. And for me, I had seen Skinnerd a couple of years earlier, um, and that was the first time I had seen the three guitar attack. You know,
Yeah.
and Hatchet had the same thing, and it's interesting how these badass Southern boys, Jack Daniels, drinking, fighting, they have this whole mystique, but at the same time they play very delicate harmonies on the
Yeah.
guitar. They're quite orchestrated, and that doesn't happen. That didn't happen in the North. Um, but I was very impressed by them and their songs, and so I signed them. He's that very easy,
Well,
very
then maybe I should turn the question around. What do you think kept? I mean, if everybody hears the music and likes it, some of these people probably liked the music but passed on Molly Hatchet. What do you think the other A&R people were thinking that caused them to pass?
I don't think they were thinking. Maybe they just had taste. It's all about taste, really. If I liked Ted Nugent's performance. I liked the fact that all of his songs were built on, sorry,
No problem.
on a rhythm guitar lick. You know, and all my songs, all my productions are built on rhythm guitar licks. Especially, look at Cat Scratch Fever, look at Surrender, I mean, I love that. I was a rhythm guitar player. So so
Ah,
so that was the deal. I don't Most of the bands that I signed, nobody else wanted. uh, remarkably, Boston came to Epic Records. It was their manager's last stop in New York. He had come down from Boston, and he was playing this cassette. And the first song was More Than a Feeling, and we heard it, and I mean, when I stopped the tape, I stopped the tape in the second song. I can't remember what it was, but during the second song, and I stopped and I said, "Is this Candid Camera? Are you guys? Is this a trick?" Because it was so good, it was just laughable. It was silly. I mean, why are you bringing this to me? Are you? Why do I even have to nod my head? I mean, this is the best thing I've heard in possibly in my life in terms of commercial rock and roll.
Yeah.
Um, so sometimes it just gets dropped in your lap. Nobody wanted Ted. Nobody wanted Molly Hatchet. I think probably Cheap Trick would have been signed pretty quickly. But you know, I just happened to be there first because Jack Douglas called me and recommended the band. So I flew out to see them right away.
Well, that's going to segue us into your move to production. You worked your way into producing by editing radio releases, little 3-minute versions of some of these larger songs, and it got you, in part of the recording process. And then you talked your way into producing Ted Nugent's first solo album, and that's sort of how you became a producer. Is that correct?
Yeah, I didn't produce it. I went into the studio to protect my investment
Ah,
because the guy who owned his production deal was a nice fellow, but not a rocker. And Ted and I saw eye to eye about rock and roll music, I think. And this guy didn't. He wasn't against us, but he just wasn't. How can I put it? He didn't relate really that much to rock and roll. He was a businessman. So I went into the studio and I started making suggestions. And I was in the control room. And I made so many good suggestions that he gave me co-producer credit, which was very nice of him.
yeah.
And when the album took off, people just looked and said, I mean, they just forgot about the co, and they said, "Wow, nice job, you're a producer." Okay, that's the way things worked in the record business then. Um, so yeah, my first actual solo production was in color for Cheap Trick.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
There's a song I want to talk about on that record, actually. Um, I I was not a Cheap Trick fan until about last year. I really just never got around to listening to them until a friend of mine said, "Hey, did you know there's another version of I Want You to Want Me?" And I was, what? Another version? Oh my God. When I listened to that, I was like, this is
Yeah.
fantastic. I like this one so much more. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome, Nick. Rick and I fell apart seriously over that one because he started anyway. I'm not supposed to talk about that,
Yeah, whatever you want,
but
but I can say I love it.
it was a burlesque dance hall song. That's the way I heard it, and they turned it into a hard rock song.
Yeah.
But I put a tack piano and finger snaps in there, and yeah,
It's like a
had a
Beatles tune. It's a great.
well, I guess it may be.
It's
It
got
may
that Paul
be.
McCartney bounce.
Yeah, yeah. They had that. They had some Beatles in them.
Yeah.
They have some.
Well,
Yeah.
okay, you know Cheap Trick really well, and I want to like as I got to know Cheap Trick, this was my impression, and I'd like you because you had a front row seat to confirm or deny. My impression of Cheap Trick was that this was a bunch of music nerds who were hiding in a rock band. When I listen
Well,
to music as a songwriter myself, this is
yeah.
complicated stuff. They're using diminished chords and augmented chords, and the structures are, and yet they're pretending to do just hard rock like you wouldn't notice, but it's in there.
Well, that's Rick. That's all Rick. He's very bright, very adventurous. So and he wrote most of the songs, and Tom and Robin helped on some of them, and some songs actually, I think I remember were written just by Tom and just by Robin,
Hmm.
but Rick was 90%, and he had he had the musical gene. He was very, very good at all that stuff, and obviously a really unique guitar stylist. Um,
But
but
they're all top-notch players, and also the way they presented themselves, the kind of the two hair guys and the two weird
right,
guys. There's just something going on here, and yet the overall sound is just pure rock and roll. They're not like Queen where they're putting on a show for you. It really feels like they're trying to put one over on you. Cheap Trick.
Cheap Trick?
Yeah.
Well, maybe maybe it's a cheap trick.
Right.
Yeah. But I don't know if what he meant by that, but by that name, but um, they had that power thing going. They could drive. Auf Wiedersehen, a song on In Color, uh, pretty much my favorite. That and Hello There that opens the album.
Mhm.
They're these are strong locomotive kinds of songs that drive. Um, it's the same kind of locomotive feel that some ZZ Top songs have, although they're a little bit more down and dirty. Um, but I think that you're right. I think that each one of those four guys was the best at his instrument. I've worked with a lot of good guitarists. I wouldn't say Rick was necessarily the best. Robin was definitely the best singer. Tom was definitely the best bass player, and Bunny was absurd. I mean,
Right.
Bunny was the most effortless drummer I've ever seen. Really, I mean, he just sat there casually with a cigarette in his mouth and played his ass off, and played perfectly. He was a metronome, and and he was great as much for what he didn't play as for what he did play. He was very tasteful, and
Mhm.
I can even hear his influence in the Foo Fighters drummer. I can't remember his name, but he's very good. Um, I think Bunny influenced a lot of people, a lot of drummers who came after him, and he's very nice, Bunny. Yeah,
I want to talk about two more bands. These are bands
yeah,
that most people have not heard of, and I want to talk about them because they're so great.
yeah,
And you may be able to guess the first one. You want to guess?
yeah. The producers.
That's it, man. I'm telling you.
Yeah,
I only found them about 2 weeks ago, and
really. Come on.
I'm so well. When I was okay, look, I'm 12 years old, right? And What's He Got is a big hit, and I love this song, right? And Found Out About You, I love this song, and then they vanish, and I forget all about them, right?
Mhm.
Then I go listen to this album, this producer's album. It's perfect. It is
Yeah, yeah.
It's
It's
like
really good.
it should be one of the 100 albums you have to hear before you die. It is that good.
I think
And
so.
and you go on allmusic.com and there are no reviews of the albums. It's like they don't exist. This
Yeah.
does not compute. Can you help us with this?
Well, I think a big problem was sometimes you can blame the label, and I blame the label in this. Also, there are two things. The label fell down. It was their first act. It was a subsidiary label for CBS called Portrait Records, and it was like a little sister to Epic. And they just didn't do the job. They just didn't. Everything has to be right to make a hit record. Um, I love the band. The biggest heartbreak of my career, the biggest disappointment. I felt so bad, and I felt so badly for them. Because I'm responsible. I was responsible for putting them on that label. I was responsible for making those two records, the first two records,
And the
and
second
I
one is
felt
equally
bad.
good too. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
felt bad. And I loved making that record. I loved the band. I loved working with them. And I loved listening to their stuff. The arrangement of the songs may have been a little too linear, I think. a little too repetitive,
Hmm.
and not maybe you know, really a pop song or a rock song or a power pop song should say what it's got to say and then stop.
Yeah.
They said it because it was so good. What they said it over and over. They said it a number of times, and that was one of the hallmarks of Kyle's songwriting. Um, but
Well,
all in
Eric,
all,
Elvis
that
Costello, Joe Jackson, these bands, I mean, they all did that.
yeah,
So the
yeah,
Cars, I don't know. There's no reason why we
right,
shouldn't be
right.
talking about the producers. I'm sorry. I understand what you're doing, but there is nothing wrong with those albums. There is nothing wrong with them.
No, they were so good.
Yeah,
There are a couple of songs I think that could have been mixed a little better.
sure.
There are a couple of songs that had great mixes. I just think the sound and the drive of their, you know, um, what's the one? Um, that's it. I Love Lucy.
Yeah.
I mean, how can you keep that up? That it was such a that one and Who Do You Think You Are?
Hmm.
It's like da, 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 da. It's so fast and so neat, you know,
Yes. Very clean.
and you just can't sit still. And the lyrics are clever.
Boys say when, girls say why. That's wonderful stuff. That song is hilarious.
yeah, it's true. I love them. I was there. I watched the band that preceded them that Kyle was in when we were doing TED in Atlanta. I would go after the studio. We'd go to Buckhead and we'd see Whiteface, this band on Mercury. I guess they were on Mercury. And Kyle was the lead singer and bass player in that band. And I thought they were really good. And he was, of course, a star. And when they formed the producers, I can't remember exactly when or how I saw them first, but there was no question. And I loved being with them in the studio. They were funny. They were smart. I mean, the producers and Cheap Trick were both the most pleasant bands that I ever worked with.
Yeah.
Um, and neither one of them turned out to be as big as they should have been, in my
Yeah.
opinion. Um, and anyway, I mean, the producers I would call a cult band. They have a very, very faithful and strong following, but their following should be like many millions, and it's probably hundreds of thousands.
Right.
But they were just great. Everything about them was just great, and I feel bad. I also feel bad about Mother's Finest.
That was my next. That's who I'm talking about next. Yeah. They
Yeah,
fared a little better than producers, but the same sort of thing.
probably Mother's Finest. No one could touch them live.
Yeah.
They incinerated stages. They were so good. I mean, I just I I saw them at Alex Cooley's Electric Ballroom in Atlanta, and at the end of the set, I just stood up and looked around, and I said, "Where in God's name is the industry? Where it does nobody else want this band?" And I grabbed them and look at me, a guy from Boston, who's a rocker trying to do, basically a black metal band.
Right. Very odd.
Fortunately, the metal I could relate to. I was not qualified really at all to do anything, um, anything that was that funky. I just didn't do funk, and they certainly did, and I enjoyed them. I think that there are songs that they Mickey's Monkey, for instance, is I think it's just the best. It's the most wonderful song and should have been a big hit. And it was a cover, of course, but it was generations later. I, I don't know. Joyce was every bit as good as any black singer who did rock and roll.
The first two
Anyway,
albums are tremendous. The first two
yeah,
albums, they're tremendous. And I love my favorite moment, I think, of the album. There's a song, Disco In and Disco Out. Is that the name of the song?
Disco that way.
That's Disco This Way and Disco That Way. And there's an outro, which is this percussion phenomenon, this wash of percussion. It's just beautiful.
Yeah, I was playing in that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what I played, but I was in there.
As
Yeah.
I listen to these albums, I just don't, I had the same response you did 30, 40 years later, listening to the albums.
Yeah.
Where was this band? Why are they not on the radio all the time? They outplay, they sound like Heart with a black vocal section. They're just,
Right.
they outplay all these other bands that Sly and the Family Stone, fine, they're fine, but these people are better.
Yeah.
What's going on?
Yeah, I'm with you. I am absolutely with you.
Yeah.
You know, I had a guy who just booked a room with us here. We're still in business. We're leaving in October. We've sold, but this guy, for some reason, he said, "Downed" by Cheap Trick is. He said this is the greatest rock and roll song ever. He wanted to come here because of my association with Cheap Trick, but.
Well, both of these bands were Atlanta bands. No, I wonder if
That's
there's
right.
something now. I'm calling you from Atlanta. This is Atlanta that I'm in. Now I grew up in Atlanta in the 80s, and that was a sad thing because Atlanta in the 80s was like a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde from Atlanta in the 70s. The town completely changed. Anybody of my generation had no clue how cool Atlanta was in the 70s. Can you talk? Was
Yeah.
there something about coming from Atlanta that was a stigma, or was it just amazing? What was Atlanta like in the 70s?
It was a party town. There were, I mean, statistically, demographically, women outnumbered men heavily. And anyone in the South who wanted to succeed, be in an exciting place, get into business, get out of their small town, they all seemed to come to Atlanta. And there was a kind of a big explosion in the city, building and vibrant, and it was just a happening place. I spent most of my time in the studio, but I did stay at the Omni, which was brand new at the time, and there was an ice rink down there. I could see it from my window, and it was indoors, and there was a fabulous restaurant, and everybody was good looking. It was like LA. Really, it was like LA.
Yeah.
And there were drugs, and it was party time, major party time. Buckhead had a lot of, the whole town had a lot of music, and I don't know, it was just jumping. I didn't live there.
Well, the gravity all went to Athens within about 4 or 5 years, and Atlanta dried up as far as really being a place to be until rap came back and knocked it back in. But do you think that producers and Mother's Finest being from Atlanta had a disadvantage?
No.
Okay, good.
No, because they were both in the 80s, but no, not at all. I mean, it really doesn't matter where you come from. I don't know. With Mother's Finest, I remember being in the singles meeting at CBS, and that's where we discussed that week's releases, and we got reports from the promotion department, and the head of promotion said, well, it seems to be too black for white radio and too white for black radio, and it fell between the cracks.
And they weren't afraid to be controversial.
Yeah, right. And I thought that was bullshit, but there you go. I didn't have, at that time, the authority to bang the table with my shoe and say, God damn it, you guys have to break this band. This is a good band. Don't screw this one up. And so I didn't have that authority, and I didn't do it. And I failed. I feel that I failed those two bands. Yeah. I failed some other bands too. That Brownsville. I did an album with them in Ann Arbor, and it was just a great rock and roll album. and it had a version of Who Do You Love, Bo Diddley's Who Do You Love on it that I think was the best of 8 different cover versions, including George Thorogood. But they just didn't get the attention that they deserved. And you know, it's terrible because A&R people can put their hearts and souls into something, and the promotion guys, they have other priorities. And there's politics, and there's this, and there's that. It's tough. It's tough to guide your record all the way to the top. The ones that did the best for me, the ones that did the best for me were kind of surprises. You know,
Yeah.
Shout at the Devil. I didn't really expect that much from them, even though they had a big buzz going in LA. But it just exploded, and Boston was silly. It was
Yeah,
just
right.
silly. You know, 16 million on their debut album. I wish I had gotten a piece in the 90s. You know, labels started giving A&R men a little piece, a little, you know, percentage of the sales. Um, that would have amounted to something on 16 million albums, you know?
I want to talk about your production a little bit.
Mm,
You've included, as far as your description of your production, that you use doubled rhythm guitars, shakers,
yeah,
tambourines, hand claps, Hammond. But the thing that interested me was you said a way of dividing time to create a kind of locomotive feel. And you've
yeah,
alluded to this earlier. What
yeah.
are you talking about with locomotive?
Uh, well, it's hard to, you know, and I have a lot of songs that have that element in on a playlist on my phone that I take to the gym because it propels me. It's my engine. It's endurance. It's I don't know if you ever heard a song called "Jesus Built My Hot Rod."
No, I haven't.
No, um, and I can't remember. You know, I'm old now, and I can't remember things, and I can't remember the artist. But it was, but it's the most driving song I've ever heard. I love rolling rhythm, and I love smooth percussive glide. I mean, it's all about forward motion
Mhm.
and riding. You know, you just get on that groove and you ride. And there are ways to make it groovier and smoother and more forward feeling. It's hard to explain, but I'm a big rhythm fan, and I always did all the percussion later on. I never hired any percussionist except a conga player. And I would always tell the bands, I'm going to do the percussion tomorrow. Stay home. I'm going to do the percussion on the whole album at the end of the recording, just before we mix. And if you don't like it, we'll hire just, you know, a percussionist. And I never in 52 albums I was never turned down. So I had a lot of fun doing that.
You said that,
And I would do that with guitars too.
yeah,
You don't, you probably are not familiar with Auf Wiedersehen, the Cheap Trick song.
I'm not as familiar as I should be. I've heard it.
Well, you shouldn't. It's not should be, but you know, it has dual cello,
Huh.
and the cellos. I mean, I brought this cello player in, and I said, all you're gonna do. I'm sorry, we're paying you. All you're gonna do is back and forth, and that's all. And then and it went along with the guitar lift, and it
Yeah.
makes this very charging pulse underneath everything. And it's I don't know, you know, I'm there are several things that I kept doing when I produced harmonies, um, a lot of um, a lot of string pads, you know, synthesizer pads
Mhm.
that would go through everything one note, um, and a lot of B3, a lot of Hammond B3. There are organ. There's organ hidden in most of Motley Crue's power chords.
Huh.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah. Mick Mars is, you know, it is interesting, and it appears a lot, not a lot, but in certain places in Cheap Trick songs too. I
The
I
whole
are you
sound.
well, go ahead.
I was going to say the whole sound of metal really changed from the early 80s to the late 80s in a way that I hated. And for me, Van Halen is the best example of this. I just love the early albums and they sound clean and fun. And then by the mid 80s, they start to get muddy and heavy.
Yeah, well, bottom came forward, but there wasn't much bottom in the 70s, you know. And then in the 80s it came forward, and in the 90s it became, as far as I'm concerned, unbearably excessive. The cars go by.
By bottom, you mean just like a low rumble?
Yeah, the bottom of frequencies,
Yeah.
low frequencies. I mean, they kind of drown out. The Beats headphones, when they came out, I was saying, "Oh boy, there's a lot of talk about this." And I put them on, and they were all bottom and all top. They were just hype.
Hmm.
Um, anyway,
That's
um,
okay.
that's
You,
my old guy thing.
it's fine. That's what we're
You
here
call
for.
that music? These kids today.
You have said that every band that ever came in the studio wanted to record live. You would think
Yeah,
that would be a great way of getting that locomotive feel, that live energy. And you said it never worked.
not a chance. Not a chance. I mean, they couldn't. You really needed to establish a perfect drum track before you could build on it. The building thing, the pyramid, is really important. And you can't have a weak foundation. You just can't. You can't fix it in the mix. You gotta you gotta have that perfect drum track, and then you put the bass on it. It's tight. They would come into the studio and they'd say, "We want to record live because the other way is a cop out." And I'd say, "Okay, go out there. We'll do a couple of takes." They'd come in, and then they'd listen to what they did, because they had never heard a microphone record, really a good microphone record them. And the whole band would listen to the whole band playing together, and they'd blanch. I mean, they'd just say, "Okay, okay, I think maybe we'll do it your way." Because prior to that, all they did was play really, really loud and just try to hear themselves over everybody else. And they really couldn't tell how many errors and inconsistencies there were in their performances.
Yeah. One of the most telling production situations that reminds me of is Blue Oyster Cult. And you only produced one album of Blue Oyster Cult, and it sounds
Yeah.
very different. It actually kind of sounds like Cheap Trick.
Well, it was kind of their Sergeant Pepper, or their Satanic Majesty's request. Um,
I really liked it, by the way.
you liked the Blue Oyster Cult
I
album?
did. Now I'm not.
Yeah.
I haven't started listening to them really. I listened to some of that album and some of the others for comparison.
Yeah.
I'm going to be listening to their catalog later, but I
Yeah.
really did enjoy. I mean, I know, I'm not a Blue Oyster Cult fanatic and I'll get shot by
Right.
the Blue Oyster Cult people for saying this, but I thought it was a good sounding record. I really did.
Yeah. I'm sorry it didn't do better. It was pretty experimental, and Donald was heavily experimenting there. And Eric was not happy with me because I had Donald do a lot of singing. Buck Dharma. He did a lot of singing. I really enjoyed working with him. He's a great guitar player, underrated, and he's very funny. He's very funny. He kept me in stitches in the control room the whole time. And that's really important when you're in a recording studio. Humor.
Yeah.
It's good. It makes things go much more easily.
By the 90s, the music is starting to change. And you found yourself, despite your huge list of successes, you found yourself sort of the odd man out. Can you talk about that?
Well, it's time to go.
Yeah.
It was easy. Hit artists, big artists, rock stars, everybody, peaks. They do really well early on, and then they hit their stride, and then they fade away. And if they don't fade away, they keep producing stuff that is not very good.
Mm.
You know, songwriters especially, they hit their stride, and then they, you know, their songs are not as good as the earlier songs. Um, I I used to strive for certain elements of, you know, in the studio, certain things, you know, pretty perfect. I needed good rhythm. I needed good tuning. I needed pitch. I needed everything, because that's how you got power, you know, in pop music. Um, and then, and you know, in the early '90s, starting with Seattle and then moving on, those things not only got less and less important to musicians, they became uh, undesirable.
Mhm.
They, you know, it was like, this sounds too corporate, and that's okay, but this sounds too good. You know, that's what started to happen. You know, I tell a story about leaving for the studio and stopping at the door because my daughter was in her mid-teens, was playing Licensed to Ill, and I went to her doorway and I said, "Jules, how can you listen to that? It sounds like it was recorded in 5 minutes." And she nodded her head. I said, "Yeah." And I said, "Oh no, everything I know is wrong."
Well,
And
now
that
hang
that was
on.
the end of it. That was
This
the end of it. I just
How
I
different
just
is this
left.
from? But this hadn't this happened in the early '70s with punk as well? The Ramones and
No.
Sex Pistols.
Yeah, yeah, but that was coexisting and paralleling
Mhm.
pop music and rock music and hard rock music, and Motown and everything. It just was another genre.
I see.
But after '92 or '3, um, there was very little of music that I related to that was being made. So I saw the writing on the wall, and you know, I did some interesting projects then, but nothing really great. Nice people, but you know, I could just see, and it was enough. I mean, I was burnt, and 52 albums. That's a lot of music. Um,
Yeah.
so I read a book that my friend recommended to me, and it just got me. It just turned me around, and I left.
Who moved my cheese?
Who moved my cheese? Just the greatest motivator. A wonderful book. It's a 45-minute book, and it literally changed my life. I mean, I stood up and said, I slapped my forehead and said, I could have had a V8. What am I doing? What
And
am I
so
doing?
that led talk about where that led you, where you're sitting now.
Well, yeah. I said I have to reinvent myself because I was angry and, you know, idle, and I just wasn't a happy person. Everybody was going to work except me, and um, my you know, self respect was suffering. So I read the book, and the book says, don't be pissed off, don't stick your, you know, your heels in the ground, and be a you know, a mule. Go with the flow, go with the changes, go, you know, if unanticipated change occurs, then just make an adjustment and go with it. So I immediately came east and looked for a place to make into a luxury bed and breakfast, which I thought was a good thing to do because there weren't any, and they were all, you know, traditional bed and breakfasts with a lot of fabric and little china elephant collections, and you know, you could have a muffin and scrambled eggs for breakfast maybe, um, and there were no conveniences at all. So it was internet time, you know, we could wire the place, all suites, and the deal is that I was able to make this a unique and special um, uh, lodging because I could afford to do it. The bed and breakfast resulted from people inheriting huge houses from their, parents or grandparents or uncles and aunts, and not being able to afford to pay the taxes on them. So they took in boarders. And that's what a B&B was. And they didn't have enough money, so they never had TVs in the room or anything else, really. It was part of the charm to have nothing. So I gave them everything. And it was very successful. We've won awards. And however, it's been 20 years, and I'm ready to fully kick back. Should have done it long ago, but I can afford to. And we're going to move up the street about a mile.
Okay.
Yeah, and we're working on that house now, and it's just it's really a wonderful thing, you know.
Do you consider yourself a storyteller? You tell great stories. You produced in a way that told a story in the song. Has that helped you think of your life as a story to kind of keep moving through parts?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've written a book, and
Okay.
yeah, it's finished, and I'm about to try to get it out to agents and write a proposal and do that thing.
All right. Great.
It's a very good book. It's not like the others. It's kind of instructional. It's enlightening. It's funny. Um, you know, it's called Slave to the Melody, and it's about how I couldn't stay out of music. How I got in when I was a little. Uh, when I was 9, Elvis started. That's when I heard Hound Dog.
Yeah.
Yeah, go away. My cat is on the desk here.
I figured that's what it was.
Um, so from then on, I just I was a sponge for music, and I'm going to let him out.
Sure. Go ahead.
So just hold on for a minute. Go ahead. See you. Okay. Yeah. So I do tell a lifelong story in the book, and I think it's pretty entertaining. We'll see if anybody else does.
Yeah. Good luck with that. I hope that somebody
Thank-
picks that up. Now you're on the other side, right? Now you're the one offering up to be rejected or given feedback. That's got to be a little daunting.
Yeah, yeah. I'm pretty sure it'll be published because I have a lot of rock and roll books and books by musicians, and not many of them are that good. And I have to say, it sounds puffy and arrogant, but I'm a good writer.
Yeah.
I can write almost as well as I think I produce music. So those are the two things I can do and make a really good omelet.
Okay.
So yeah, so that's about it. And I've been fortunate enough to have been given the opportunity to do both of those things.
All three, right?
Yeah,
Make the omelets. You made
the
omelets.
omelet. I made a lot of omelets.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I've had a very good life with those two careers.
Tom Werman, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. It has just been so much fun.
It has, and not all of them are, but this was really fun. And if you want to talk about anything else in the future, I'd be happy to talk with you.
Well, then when your book comes out, we'll have a
Hmm.
follow-up interview. Does that sound good?
That sounds good. It'll probably take a year, but yeah, that'd be great.
We'll be here.
Okay, I hope I will.
And thank you folks for tuning in. As always, I hope you enjoyed this surprise guest. We're very happy to have these kind of folks on our show. And that's because you keep liking our videos and you keep subscribing. The more support you get to us, the more of these folks we can get on. So thanks. If you need to reach me, you can reach me at adam@willowschoolga.com, and keep watching us for more interviews. And we will see you next time. Thanks.